So our next speaker, after Steli yesterday, actually, is the second member of our most dangerous jury ever. And the one moderating his talk will be Kelly. He's actually a very lovable guy, even though the startups were a bit scared of him yesterday. So please welcome Kelly to the stage.
That's right.
Hi, so we're super lucky to have Marvin. He is a partner in 500 startups. He is also a mentor, an entrepreneur, and an exile from a big corporate career. We welcome Marvin to the stage. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. You're sick. Thank you. Hi, everyone. That was a very interesting presentation, and I hope you guys are paying attention. A lot of times for SEO and content marketing, something we care a lot about also at 500 Startups. Getting the basics right is probably half the battle, I'd say most of the battle, all right? So let's jump into it. So before I get started, want to thank Natasha, Peja, Vlad, as well as the rest of the organizers and volunteers for this conference. I've actually never been to Montenegro. I've actually spent a lot of time in the Balkans, spent a lot of time in Serbia, spent a lot of time in Croatia, spent a lot of time also in Slovenia. And I mean, this country is a jewel, and I hope you guys understand sort of what you have. And I really, really mean that. This has been a great treat here, so thank you so much for having me. So now, let's jump into the core. So what I'm going to talk about, what I'll do in this presentation is roughly about 20 slides, introduce a little bit myself, what my firm does, and we're going to jump into sort of some frameworks and ways that we look at sort of companies from a growth perspective, right? So who I am, and I love to talk about myself, so as introduced, I'm a partner of 500 Startups. Who here has heard of 500 Startups? Okay, yeah, 5 people, wonderful. We're not doing our job. 500 startups I'll talk about. I'm a mentor at 20 different startup accelerators across the globe. I sit on a lot of boards, advisory boards. This is a picture of San Francisco, my city. I've lived there for the last 15 years. I moved there back in the first dot-com boom back in '99, which was an interesting time to join. And prior to this, I was actually a executive at Yahoo. So I was there for about 10.5 years. And actually before Yahoo, I spent 2 years actually at an e-commerce startup. I was an early employee. We raised about $30 million and proceeded to waste $30 million and spent it all pretty much. So they're still around, but not super successful right now. But it was a great, great learning experience. 500 Startups, for most of the people in the room who've never heard of us, we are a venture capital firm. We started about 5 years ago. We're one of the very few Silicon Valley VC firms that actually invest globally. So we've invested in over 1,000 companies worldwide. We invest in early stage companies. We also have an accelerator program. I run the San Francisco office for 500 Startups. And out of this 1,000 companies we invested in, 300 of them are actually outside of the US. And another set that we're very, very proud of, 300 of our teams actually have a female co-founder or founder. Something that we're very, 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 very proud of because we believe in diversity and we think smart people. We think these are actually underutilized assets, right? Like this isn't a charity. We are a for-profit. We think that this is a huge, huge opportunity, and we think that they're not recognized by most of the other investing world right now. So which is actually one of the reasons I actually joined the firm. Just this belief in diversity. Just so in case anyone sort of is interested, please talk to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your ideas later on. Right? So there's been a bunch of changes in the startup world. This is just to set the tone and stage of why a firm like mine exists, why I'm so bullish on actually the startup economy, right? I was an executive at Yahoo making a crap load of money. Why did you leave this company, right? I left this company because, number one, working at big companies suck. No offense to anybody who works here in large companies. I think it's a great place to go and learn stuff, but you don't want to stay too long. Because the reality is the future is in the world of startups. I mentioned to you, this firm the startup I worked at in '99, 2000, 2001, we raised $35 million. Why did we have to raise $35 million? Half of that was to go and buy servers that we had to go and set up. The other half was to go and buy marketing, right? TV ads, whatever. There's been huge changes over the last 10 years particularly. You have cloud services like Amazon Web Services, right? You have channels like payment services like PayPal. You have distribution channels like Android or like the Apple App Store. You have marketing channels like Google AdWords and Facebook. This is a big deal, right? Just on Facebook alone, you can reach 1.5 billion people across the globe. That has never existed before. And because of all these things, the cost structure of startups, of doing startups, has gone down like at least 1,000 times, right? Think about that. You can do a startup and build a product for $50,000. For previously, you'd have to raise $5 million just to go and build a prototype 10 years ago. Huge change. You should be very excited about this. If you're a big company, you should be fucking scared. You should be absolutely terrified because what's going to happen, all these big companies, they're basically going to be like elephants eaten by hundreds of millions of ants, which is what these startups actually do. That's why I'm very, very excited about this space. So having said that, that's the good news, right? The good news is easier to do a startup, and that's why you see this proliferation of hundreds, if not thousands of startups every single year, not just in the Valley, across the globe. And you can build it anywhere in the world, which is why I'm very, very bullish, in line with what Paul said yesterday, small is better. You can build from Montenegro, you can build from Serbia, you can build from London, you can build from wherever. You can create these startups anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley. Having said that, startups are still challenging. This is a great book. If you're interested in startups, read it. And especially for the entrepreneurs, read this. Startups are not for the faint of heart. Don't do this if you think it's sexy, because it's not. It's fucking hard work. But it's probably one of the most meaningful and impactful things you can actually work on. And so the point I'm making is, besides the fact that it's so easy to do startups now, the challenge is there's so many startups out there, you actually have to stand out against them. This is where the sales and marketing and positioning piece actually comes in. And one of the key things, this is from Katerina Fake, very successful entrepreneur. She created Flickr, sold this to Yahoo. I crossed paths with her at Yahoo. I don't know very, very well. She's a very, very well-known investor. She built another company called Huddle that she sold to eBay. So very, very successful entrepreneur. She said this: working on the right problem is more important than working hard. This also goes in line with what Sally said yesterday, right? And I would also say one other thing besides. It's not just working on stuff that's actually important, stuff that's important to you. Like and Dylan actually mentioned this in the panel, right? Like you can tell, like we look at this term, mercenaries versus missionaries, right? I invest in missionaries. I will never, ever invest in a mercenary. Someone who's going to do a startup because they think they're going to make money. What a fucking stupid thing to do. Your odds of success of actually success in a startup is incredibly low. Knowing that, why would you work on something that you don't give a shit about? I'm so sick and tired of MBA entrepreneurs showing up in my office and pitching this thing, and I'm like, why are you qualified for this? Why are you doing this? Why is this important? Why is this, what is your attachment to this problem? And I think this is one of the things that you need to keep in mind. If you're going to spend the next 5 to 10 years working on something, whether it's a job, whether it's actually a startup, make sure you're working on something that matters personally to you, right? And hopefully there's customers as well too, but work on something that personally matters to you. The great thing about this now too, so assuming you find something that you love or some problem that actually appeals to you, there's great methodology now that actually is out there that you can use, right? Lean startup, even in the Valley, everybody talks about lean startup. Nobody follows it because it's fucking hard. It's the truth, right? Oh, pivot, MVP. You're like, what does that actually mean? It's actually about getting customer feedback, building as little as possible, getting customer feedback, and iterating. So these are awesome books, little bets, right? Don't spend $1 million or don't spend like a year working on a product before you get market feedback. It's stupid. And I see this over and over and over again, particularly in this region, right? Awesome technical talent. The problem with technical talent, your natural inclination is to build more features, build more features. Don't talk to customers, build more features. That's a great way to waste your time. And the reason I'm so harsh on that, because I do not want you to waste time, right? That's all you have. You lose money, you can get money back. You lose time, you never get your time back. Thank you. Vision, the other part about vision, right? So there's methodology, but now ultimately it's about what are you trying to do, right? Assuming that you have a problem that you want to solve, where do you see the world to be? What's the story, right? And I talk about vision. I'll give you a live example. You're like, what the fuck is he talking about? So I have this one company I invested in, and so a company called Neighborly, right? A guy named Jace Wilson, really, really smart guy. I think came from MIT or something like that. And he was introduced to us. And I was just like, oh, I'll take this meeting because like my friend said I had to take this meeting. And he painted this incredibly compelling picture. So what Neighborly is there a marketplace for selling municipal bonds. If you know the municipal bonds market in the US, it is a hundreds of billions of dollar market. And it's been, and basically, taken over by Wall Street, right? So what happens is banks like those fuckers at Goldman Sachs goes and buy these bonds and they mark them up, right? And over time, they get marked up so much, they buy them cheap, they mark them up, and they sell them to basically these mutual funds who ultimately sell it to people like me who are investors. So this huge markup. And what he's saying is that the old days, bonds were sold directly to people. What I want to do is democratize the process, make this, allow the municipalities that you live in to actually get more money, and also to allow people to get better deals on these municipal bonds and cut out these fuckers from Goldman Sachs, right? And I'm like, oh my God, sign me up for that. I'm all for that. That's the ultimate vision, right? Democratizing something that was taken over by a bunch of like parasitical middlemen. I'm all over that. So we invested in this company as an example, right? That was the vision he portrayed. And he seems to be executing on it. We'll see. But I think it's a vision worth fighting for, as an example, what I invest in. The other thing is like doing things. So assuming you have the vision, assuming you have all these pieces, do things that don't scale. Paul Graham of Y Combinator, probably the freaking Yoda and guru of like startups everywhere. I mean, this is really, really true. I think, and I'll lead into something. I'll explain what this means. There's a point, add a zero, right? So, how many times you've been in these startup meetings and it's like, yeah, when I'm going to go and get when I get 1 million users and we're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, you know what? And this is in line with what Stelly said yesterday, right? Get one user, get one customer. Then the next thing you do is add a zero, figure out how to get 10 customers. Then you figure out how to get 100 customers, then 1,000. Anytime I see someone who's like, oh, we got 5 users, and now we're going to get 1 million, I'm like, that's bullshit, right? You're not systematic. You cannot figure out, I've never seen anything like that work. Be systematic, add a zero, right? 1 user, 10 users, 100 users, 1,000 users. That allows you to be very, very clear and concise in how you get this. Get your next group of folks. There's no way you can basically jump from 1 user to 1 million users. Never happens. All right? Does that make sense? It makes sense in my head. I was out late last night, so it makes sense in my head. All right. The other thing, and you'll have these slides, right? So the point is also understand what stage your startup is at. And this is a danger, the benefit of actually having all these blogs and all these books and all this amazing, amazing information out there. It's just there's all this stuff, and it's great, right? All this stuff did not exist when I first started in the Valley in '99, right? And so this is an incredible asset. It's also, in my opinion, a very, very big disadvantage because you miss a lot of the context of, how many times you heard these people like, well, I read Dropbox or Airbnb did this thing. And I'm like, yeah. But the advice that you should be looking at is what did Dropbox or Airbnb do 5 years ago when they're first starting off? That is going to be more relevant than what they're doing now after they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. They have 300 people. The tactics that they're using now are completely irrelevant to you because it's a completely different stage. All right? So understand the stage that you're at. And when you read TechCrunch, I love TechCrunch, love the guys over there, but that's the danger of just what I call startup porn, right? You read this thing, it's like, oh yeah, startup porn, so awesome. And I think the problem about that is really understanding the context of it. It's great, this company raised a lot of money, did this and raised a lot of money, but what did they do if you were an early stage company? What did they do 2 years ago? Right? That's relevant for you, not what's happening now. It's good to understand, but understand the stage that you're at and have context when somebody's giving you feedback and advice. Have a good view on whether that makes sense or not, or whether the timing is right or not for you. All right? So growth, right? Marketing versus growth. And this is one of the things that's come out of Silicon Valley in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's a term called growth hacker. And I hate this term. It's kind of a douchebag term, but it's a great way to differentiate versus marketing, right? In marketing, you're actually spending money to go and buy users. Versus growth hackers, and this is the reason for having all these platforms, right? On Facebook, you have over 1.5 billion people. So you can actually find these potential users on these platforms, Pinterest, all these other platforms out there. And these are awesome books. If Sean Ellis is a friend, Ryan Holiday, this is a great, great book. If you want to get a quick background. So growth hacking, right? Growth hacking is a methodology that's actually come out of Silicon Valley. It's used by great, great companies like Pinterest, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Hipmonk. I mean, you go down the list of like most of these very, very high growth companies, it would have only come from a place like Silicon Valley. The reason is because as a startup, you actually have no money. So you have to go and figure out very, very new and creative ways of actually getting users, right? And so it could only have come from a place like Silicon Valley. Let me talk to you what it is. One of the things that the valuable metrics that I think a lot about, and this is a framework to use, and I think every single startup needs to use this. It's called R metrics, created by my boss, Dave McClure. He's part of the PayPal mafia, was an early sort of employee at PayPal, was a marketing person, also probably one of the best investors in Valley, in my opinion. Of course, I'm biased. He created this called acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, referral. And I think like, especially when you start from the beginning, you're trying to use this as a framework to see where your problems are, right? I'll give you a sort of a live example, a story. So as you can see, I talk to a lot of companies. We have over 1,000 companies in our portfolio. And one of the first things I see when I see growth actually slowing down in these companies, I take a look at what is the plug, what's happening. So I'll give you an example. In the acquisition phase, they acquire 100 users. And then what you want to find is like, well, wait a minute, then only about 50 of them are actually activating, but only one of them, you're only retaining one of them. Where is the problem? Anyone? Where's the problem? I actually think it's retention. Wrong, right? Think about it, right? 100 users drops down to 50, but you're retaining one user afterwards, right? So if you were to use this framework to hone where the problem is in your funnel, where you would think the problem would be in retention, right? And I'll give you an example. The acquisition is relatively easy to do. So another great example, right? Company, they had over 200 million downloads, and they have about 15 to 20 million, 15 to 20 million monthly users. Is that good or bad? Is that good or bad? 200 million downloads, 15 to 20 million monthly users. It sucks. Sucks, all right? Tell you why. And by looking at that, this is a conversation I had. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on advertising, bringing people into the funnel. And these people were not retaining. So I remember talking to the CEO, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? You're an idiot, right? Take that money, fix your product, stop advertising, right? Stop the acquisition piece. Your problem is the activation retention piece. If you can figure that piece out, that's the time you actually go back and start advertising. Facebook, famous story, Chamath Palihapitiya, don't know the guy. We have friends of friends. He actually was the head of growth at Facebook. You know, back in 2008 or 2009, he found out that people were not retaining, and because there was no retention, because they weren't getting referrals, they stopped all their acquisition efforts for a full year trying to figure out the activation retention situation. And then once they figured it out, then they turned it on, and then they grew like a weed from 2009 onwards, right? People don't know this story, right? Everyone looks at like Facebook as like, oh, they just grew and grew and grew. It's not the case. Almost every single major startup, if you look at their traffic levels in the beginning, they're almost like this, right? And all of a sudden they hit this point and then they just blow up. And so it takes time to figure this stuff out, right? And it seems like this is what frameworks are useful for, right? Simple to use, very, 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 very hard to figure out. All right. And growth, right? This is growth hacking, this whole sort of terminology. It's all about the scientific method, right? You have a thesis, right? It's just like A/B testing, right? If I add this feature, and I'm going to compare it. It's what we call A/B testing, right? Taken from pharmaceutical sort of like drug testing. One group gets the drug, another group does not get the drug, and see if there's any difference. And there's no different. One group sees a new feature, one group does not see the feature, and then see if there's actually sort of any sort of incremental sort of growth in that demographic, or you're targeting different groups, whatever it is. But the whole point about you start with the definable goal and the hypothesis, and you're testing it. It's called A/B testing. And you're like, okay, I get that. That's simple, right? It is simple. What makes this really, really challenging is that 9 out of your 10 tests are actually hard and inconclusive. There's no results from that, right? 9 out of 10 tests that you run by doing this methodology will be inconclusive. But the point about this, all the best companies are running 5, 10, 15 tests, sometimes a week if you're a big company, or in most cases, small startups. You should be running 1 test a week, maybe 2 tests a week, or maybe 1 test every 2 weeks. But the point is you should be doing this on a regular basis. Even though you aren't sometimes not getting conclusive results, the learnings that you get from the 1 out of 10 tests that actually work out is invaluable. And this process, as you do it over and over and over and over again, it's actually about getting the aggregate sort of like, you're getting sort of like it's marginal sort of like it's aggregate gains from like marginal results, right? These small results over time really catapult you over the long term, right? Does this make sense? Yeah. Talked about platforms and distribution, right? So lucky now. There's all these amazing platforms now that reach tens, if not hundreds of millions of people now, right? You know, emerging channels like Snapchat, messaging apps, right? Amazing, amazing channels. I'm very, very excited by what's happening with, like, you know, Snapchat. Amazing what's happening, for example, with Line, WhatsApp, you know, Facebook Messenger. There's all these ways of reaching all these people. So the good news is a lot of these platforms own the users already, and you can actually access them either through advertising or through sort of other means, right? Through sort of integrations. But the one problem about this is channels change, right? So this is taken from my friend James Currier's slide, one of his great presentations. The issue is that these channels actually go out of popularity, in and out of popularity very, very quickly. So think about Zynga, right? Zynga grew on the back of Facebook. The minute they change their algorithm, they are fucked. And that's actually one thing you have to be really, really careful about, not being too reliant on one single channel, which is really, really dangerous. And one of the frameworks, this is, as you can tell, you know, Silicon Valley is a very, very small world. He wrote a book called Traction. Justin Mares, he's a colleague of mine at 500, works on a growth team, you know, using the bullseye framework. And this is in line with, you know, the example of like Coca-Cola, right? I think Coca-Cola is doing interesting things in the marketing side. And so they have this 70-20-10 rule, right? They spend 70% of their budget on stuff they know works for sure. Maybe it's TV or whatever. 20% on new sort of like channels. Maybe it's like online, video or whatever. And then 10% of their budgets on what they call like new sort of experimental stuff. Maybe it's Snapchat, maybe it's mobile. But having this framework allows you to diversify your spend and actually not be too reliant and learn at the same time. There's another framework, and this is a goal. I'm trying to provide you frameworks you can use to grow your business. It's the barbell framework, and this was taken from financial planning, right? So if everyone knows bonds versus sort of stock, right? So what Andrew Chen, who's also a mentor and friend, what they do actually in what he recommends, in a very, very well-known growth guy, what he recommends is the framework he uses is put like 50% of your budget and time into channels that are, you know, are going to pay back. In this case, like bonds, right? You know you're never going to lose. You know you're always going to get a return. And then you put 50% in the other side of the barbell in these new emerging, you know, high risk, but also potential high opportunity, high gain channels, like maybe in this case it's like mobile ads, or and sort of using the financial analogy in stock, or maybe investing in startups, right? High risk but high gain. And this way you diversify your channels so you're never completely reliant just on one growth channel. And the other part is analytical tools, right? Why it's great to be a startup. There's so many off-the-shelf analytical tools that exist now. You know, when I was at Yahoo back in like 2001, or even at my previous startup, we had to get bug engineers to build these tools, these analytical tools to use. And now all this stuff is off the shelf, which is fantastic, right? Having said that, all these tools exist, you should use them, but this is not a substitute for talking to customers and actually watching what customers do with your product, all right? And too many engineer type and too many folks, even Silicon Valley, use this and they don't talk to customers. It's a combination of both. You have to do both. One other thing is the 80-20 rule, right? And this is a tip I give people. You know, think about Pareto's law. 20% of your users drive 80% of your usage. And you take this even further. Go and find the 20% of the 20% that drives 80% of that 20%. You're going to find your highly, highly engaged users. Find more of them, or figure out what makes them different or similar to other folks. This is, like I said, sounds simple. It's not. It will take you time to figure it out. But if you can do this, you're going to build a very, very successful business. And actually works well for your time management, works pretty well in general for your life as well too, right? 20% of your customers drive 80% of your revenue. And these are things, important numbers to understand. 80% of your customers are going to give you 20% of your revenue. Should you keep them? How do you grow them? It's a really, really good analytical framework to use. And I would say, pretty much last of all, and this is important, is having balanced teams. This is what I look for. Someone who's actually a strong technical person, but someone who's also a business person, and hopefully there's a third person, which is a design person. But at core, having a hacker and a hustler, and even better if you can hustler, right? But this part, and this is a challenge also in this region, I would say in Central Eastern Europe, you tend to see teams that are much stronger on the technical side with no commercial side. This balance is incredibly important. And so something, especially if you're doing startups, this, you want this diversity of thinking and this focus, which is going to be critical for your success. All the best teams, all the best founders that I've had dealings with are these balanced teams. And ultimately, my last slide, easier said than done. Paul Graham, the guru, make stuff people want, right? Figure out a problem that you want to do, make stuff that people want, and then you're going to be hugely successful. So I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marvin. We're going to open it up now for Q&A.
All right, great.
So actually, if I can take the first question. So we have startup conferences every year, and we talk a lot about the importance of building your company and building your brand and building your community. And there's the drive to go to Silicon Valley, and you sort of warn against relying on that too heavily. For people who are in the audience who are interested in ultimately getting to the Valley, can you talk a little bit about what the reality of that life is like?
Yeah, so I can't tell you how many startups, and we have this term in Silicon Valley called like tech tourism, right? Like international startups who come to Silicon Valley, they visit Facebook, Google, they visit us, and then they hang out and they talk to as many people for 2 weeks and then they leave, right? And I think a lot of it's also these unrealistic expectations. I think that's a problem of like reading too much TechCrunch. Love TechCrunch, right? So I'm not bagging on them, so please, Mike, don't say anything. But TechCrunch is awesome, but it is startup porn, and you have to understand the reality is that when you read the startup porn, you're like, oh, everybody's getting funded, and it's so easy to raise money. Like you just show up at like a cafe, and VCs are waiting around the corner to throw money at you. It's probably one of the most competitive places on the planet. And so if you do not know your numbers, you do not have some level of traction, all these things, you cannot tell your story well, there's no clear vision for what you're doing is a derivative idea, you're not going to get laughed at, but you're not going to be taken seriously, right? And think about like in my situation, I meet close to 12 to 30 companies every single week, right? So you can imagine my sample size is fairly big on sort of what we look for to stand out. And so if you show up in the Valley unprepared, nobody's going to take you seriously, and first impressions actually count. Does that sort of answer your question?
It does. Can you also share with the audience a little bit of what your personal life looks like when you devote your life to starting?
I don't really have much of a personal life, to be honest. We kind of joke San Francisco is a Las Vegas of work, but the reality is that a lot of us, we do this because we enjoy it, right? It's fantastic. It's super fun. I get to work with, and I feel very privileged, right, to basically meet all these super smart, driven people who are working on something that actually matters, and I work way more than I actually ever did at Yahoo, and I worked a lot at Yahoo, but I don't feel like it's work most of the time. That's not true, but I would say 80% of the time I don't feel like it's work. But the reality is that that's why it's really, really important, and it took me a long time to get to this point. It's really important to understand what you like. Like I know there's a lot of young students here and people starting for their careers. It took me a long time to go and figure out what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was good at, what I wasn't good at. Like really take the time to learn that. Because like you're going to be spending so much time at work. In my opinion, if you want to get good at something, you actually have to put time against this, right? On my days off, I read a lot. I talk to other people in the industry. I invest a lot of my own money going to workshops and random conferences just to learn in this space. I spend thousands of dollars on books on investing and things because you're always learning and reading stuff about new industries. I really like what I do, and so hopefully I have a better chance of actually getting better. I don't say I'm good at it. I think I have a chance of getting better.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we'd like to open questions up to the audience. Would anyone like to ask Marvin anything? Yes, you in the blue shirt?
Would you ever invest in one-man show, or you prefer teams?
I prefer teams in general. We have invested in single-person companies in general, but my perspective is that doing startups is really, really lonely, and actually having co-founders is really important to have somebody to balance you out, right? You know, when you're down, this person hopefully is like up and vice versa, and it's something I see a lot, right? And you can imagine my sample size is very, very, very big on the best teams, in my opinion. And if you look at the best and biggest companies in general, were teams. They weren't necessarily one-person shows. Those tend to be anomalies.
Thank you so much, Marvin. I'm sorry, we're out of time, unfortunately.
I'll be around today, and yeah, I'll be around today.
Thank you so much.